All right! Welcome to Rockstar! Now, just so you all know, we're going to cover this topic as fast and as completely as we can. Just the way you like it. Thanks for watching!
Chapter 1. The Long Road. Imagine that you're hungry. So hungry, in fact, that all you can think about is food. When you sleep, if you sleep, all you dream about is food. When you talk, if you have someone to talk to at all you can talk about is food. Your stomach is so empty, it hurts. Your entire body hurts. Between the combination of lack of food, lack of sleep, and endless hours of back-breaking labor, you hurt so much that you're numb to it. In fact, you're so accustomed to physical pain that you've forgotten what comfort feels like. Imagine you're dirty. Dirty like you've not bathed in weeks. A thick layer of grime and dust coats your skin underneath the filthy shredded rags that you call clothes. Your once blue denim pants and jacket are now a dingy gray. Your once white shirt is now a patchy brown. Your brown leather boots are caked with mud, but you're thankful for your boots, as ugly as they are, since they're still functionally intact with no holes in them. You wish you could say the same about the blankets you're carrying, but for now, sturdy boots are what matters. With everything going wrong in your life, your only comfort is that you can still count on your boots. Socks? Forget about them. They've been gone for months. Family? No one you would care to see again. Money? Ha! What's that? Work is rarer than gold and more valuable to you as well. The road is your home now. You move from place to place, hitching a ride when you can, jumping into the boxcar of a passing train if you're fast enough, but mostly just walking. The calluses on the soles of your feet get larger and harder with each passing mile. As the calluses and sores on the palms of your hands start to fade, you despise them on your feet since they've caused you so much pain. But you wear the ones on your hands like a badge of honor, a reminder to you that work can still be found by those who continue to fight for it. But how valuable are you really? Were you really that valuable when you lost your job right after the stock market crash of '29? Were you really that valuable when your home was taken because you could no longer pay your rent? Were you really that valuable when you were forced to sell everything you owned that was worth anything and throw away the things that you couldn't sell? Perhaps your value is determined by the many hours you toil under the hot California sun, either as a farmhand or shipping worker. No, that can't be it, because if you were really worth anything, you would still be there, and not walking down this God-forsaken road without a penny to your name. Imagine you're angry, always frustrated, knowing that by yourself you'd never survive. You're not strong enough. You're not fast enough. There's always something about you that prevents you from finding work on your own. Or maybe it's him. You forgot about him for a few minutes there, didn't you? That big, strong guy you're traveling with? The big, strong, stupid guy that provides the muscle while you provide the brain? The guy that's always getting himself and, by extension, you into trouble? The same person that ensures you will find work, your ace in the hole, is the same person that ensures you won't keep the work you find for very long. That's it, isn't it? Every meal you've had in the last few years, you owe to him. But every painful callus that you have on your feet, you owe to him too. He's your blessing and your curse. Is he even paying attention? No, of course not. He's lagging behind as usual, rubbing that same stupid dead mouse he's been playing with all morning. Why does he even keep that thing? Oh, that's right, because it's soft. Well, maybe it's not such a bad thing that he enjoys something soft every now and then. The world is hard enough as it is. The Salinas River runs to your right, and for a brief moment, your powerful hunger is replaced by an even more powerful thirst. You drop your pack and wipe the sweat from your brow. The big guy behind you falls to his knees and plunges his face into the water, gulping as fast as he can. That fool is going to make himself sick drinking that scummy water. Lenny! Lenny! For God's sake, don't drink so much! Refreshed by the cool water from the pool that had formed along the river's edge, one of the main characters in John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, George Milton, dropped his pack and took in the surroundings. George's friend and companion, Lenny Small, continued to drink for a time and then stood next to George waiting for the next move, curious to see if George had something else to yell at him for. George's situation was, unfortunately, a common one for migrant workers in the 1930s. The Great Depression was hard on many people, especially those who lost their jobs and homes after the stock market crashed in 1929. At first, there was no welfare or unemployment benefits, which meant that the unemployed and poor were in real danger of starving. When a series of dust storms known as the Dust Bowl struck the center of the country, especially states like Oklahoma and Kansas, the soil was destroyed and many farmers were unable to farm, causing them to move to California for a better hope of work. The combination of the Depression and the Dust Bowl caused intense competition for jobs, creating an environment where there was little room for kindness. After all, day in and day out, people were desperate, fighting over limited resources like jobs. There wasn't much opportunity, which meant that many workers developed a ruthless attitude in order to survive. Given this overall attitude in migrant workers at the time, George and Lenny have a special relationship, to say the least. Before George, Lenny was taken care of by his Aunt Clara, but when she died, George took him in. Lenny is by far the easiest character to understand in the book, since throughout the story, he never changes, and he never really breaks character by doing something the reader wouldn't expect. He's a symbol for innocence. Lenny's defining characteristic is that he has the mind of a child, but the strength of a bodybuilder. But because he doesn't really understand his own strength, it gets him into trouble a lot. Think of Lenny and his strength as if he were a toddler that got a hold of a loaded gun. The toddler wouldn't understand the potential destructive power of the gun in his hands, but it would definitely feel confused and scared if the adults around it acted panicky and started to freak out. But unlike the toddler with the gun, no one can take Lenny's strength away from him. Lenny's most obvious trait is that he loves soft things, and who could blame him? The scary thing, though, is that when he gets a hold of something soft, he doesn't want to let it go, or he holds on to it too tightly the way a child would. If the soft thing that Lenny has tries to get away, or if someone tries to take it away, Lenny gets very possessive and holds on tighter. He doesn't mean to do it, but it's just a natural reaction for him. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be a big deal, but since Lenny is as strong as he is, he has the potential to hurt people in a panic. The first encounter we know of with Lenny and a soft thing is when George yells at him for carrying around a dead mouse. Lenny had caught the mouse sometime earlier and accidentally crushed it to death in his hand. George literally has to command Lenny to let it go, and then he throws it away so Lenny won't try to take it back. Obviously, Lenny gets really upset at George because he doesn't understand why George lashes out at him, but George ultimately gets his way. At the very beginning of the book, George is made out to be a bit of a jerk since he takes a my way or the highway attitude with Lenny. In bouts of frustration, George tells Lenny that if he didn't have to watch Lenny all the time, he could work for a month and then go into some whorehouse and spend all his money and have no responsibilities and just enjoy life. It's clearly a rant that George repeated to Lenny countless times before. But the true relationship between the two men is far more different once you look beyond George's short temper. As you go further into the story, you realize that George acts that way in order to keep Lenny from getting into trouble. For instance, shortly after throwing the mouse away, George finally explains that the mouse was probably carrying some kind of disease and that by throwing it away, he was keeping Lenny from getting sick. Lenny keeps remarking that he can't do one thing or another because if he does, George will give him hell for it. When you think about it, though, George does that to protect Lenny. He sets strict boundaries so that Lenny will have a tendency to keep to himself when George isn't around. That may seem mean, but what it does is limit the trouble Lenny can get into since he really doesn't know any better. What Lenny does for George in return, other than provide physical strength for working, is provide a sense of belonging for George. Yeah, George likes to vent his frustrations out on Lenny, but really all of it is just a bunch of hot air. George likes that Lenny depends on him for protection and direction, and ultimately, George loves the guy like a kid brother. One of the things he always tells Lenny is that guys like them have no family, and no one cares for their well-being. But George and Lenny are different because they have each other. The most important thing Lenny brings to George is that George isn't alone in his struggles. George dreams of one day getting away from all the wandering and looking for work, and hopes to establish himself as his own man with his own little farm. It doesn't have to be big or fancy, just as long as it's his. He wants independence. During the Depression, dreams like that were very easy to abandon as something that couldn't be obtained. But because Lenny loves to hear George talk about his dream for the farm, George gets to remind himself of his dream nearly every day. Lenny asks George to describe how many cows they'll have, or horses, or what kind of crops they'll grow. Most of all, Lenny loves to be told that he and George will have a bunch of rabbits. Soft, little cuddly ones that Lenny will be able to take care of and feed alfalfa. By most odds, the farm is a pipe dream, something that will never come to be for either of them. And George knows it. But for Lenny, it's real, both in his imagination and in the future. Lenny's excitement over the dream of the farm is infectious, and the more Lenny believes it, the more George believes it. Without Lenny, George would have given up completely, but with him, George has something to strive for, and that is very empowering for him. However, as a pair, George and Lenny have a real problem with bad luck and even worse timing. The reason they're even walking down a path near the river in the first place is because the driver of the bus they were riding on lied to them about where the last bus stop was. George and Lenny had just gotten work tickets and were on their way to a local ranch to work as laborers, but as it turns out, the bus driver just didn't want to take the men to the gates of the farm. So at the previous stop, he lied to have the men get off and walk the rest of the way. Ultimately, the distance was too far for the men to cover by the end of the day. So they decided to make camp for the night at the pool where they had stopped for a drink of water. George tells Lenny to remember that spot because if Lenny ever gets into any trouble, George wants him to run back to the pool so they could meet up. You get the feeling that deciding a meeting point is a common thing for George and Lenny to do, and with good cause. When George and Lenny get to the farm, they meet not only a wide cast of characters, but also, ultimately, they meet their last fatal stroke of bad luck. A relationship like George and Lenny's is rare, and the pure innocence found in Lenny's spirit is even rarer still. Neither their friendship, Lenny's purity, or the hopeful dream of the two men mesh well with a lifestyle where people and circumstances are often cruel and unjust. Only the strong prevail on these farms, and only the useful are valued. Things that are unfamiliar are often met with skepticism and distrust, which means that our two main characters will struggle against the odds to try to make ends meet, and to try to save for their own farm. Although we hope for the best as we follow their story, in Steinbeck's world, there are no happy endings for people like George and Lenny.
Well, all right. We hope you enjoyed that. You just finished the first chapter of the topic. Now, just so you know, there are 4 more chapters to go in this app, and it will only take you about 45 more minutes to complete, and you are totally done. Now check this out. The app also comes with about 15 pages of analysis and summary that you can download and use any way you need to. Here's what you gotta do. You gotta click the link below and go directly to the Apple App Store and download the full app.